participants to have stayed here. I will try to speak as quick as I can to keep the 15 minutes with all I have to say. I have already suppressed 3 slides when I realized that I had 15 minutes and not 20 minutes. And I'll try to get straight to the point, but this will be difficult as there are a lot of theoretical elements to present to you. But I'm confident because some of the persons here are used to my inventions. So what is it about? It's about, first, about monitoring. There's something we could maybe call a new carceral, and we were discussing about what the carceral is. I won't propose here an answer, but it includes, in my opinion, electronic monitoring. And for instance, electronic monitoring has developed in a context of stepped-up monitoring of people on conditional release. But there are also other mutations, like the diversification of monitoring modalities and technologies. For instance, in Belgium, the new penitentiary law says that when you enter the prison for more than 3 years, you have to write down a detention plan. It's not already applied, but this is one of the techniques to monitor detainees, because they have to say, I will realize this and this and this, and I'm accountant for this. For instance, I will learn to read, I will contact the victim and offer a victim offender mediation, I will try to solve my drug abuse problem, and so on and so on. So they can make a plan out of their time inside the prison. Inside the prison cell, there are also other monitoring techniques like surveillance, electronic devices, and also prison cloud, which is an access to an intranet, but which offers also the opportunity for the administration to know who does ask for what do they do with their intranet, and so on. Another element is also the fact that we are moving from a one-time predefined reaction to a monitoring through the carceral trajectory. What I mean is that in the classical view of prison, it was just a question of applying a decision from a judge and saying, okay, you'll stay here for 10 years, and it's 10 years and that's it. We won't ask you anything else beside being calm and disciplined. But now, as we see the evolution of the carceral, we are more and more coming to cycluses of evaluation, monitoring, and then adaptation, constant adaptation of the penalty and all the modalities of its execution. And this makes me think about the new surveillance. The gathering of massive data by devices for a possible future use, but we don't know about this use. For instance, your internet providers keep all the data of your connections. They don't know if it will ever be used, but it can be, and so there is a gathering of massive data about you. Based on a risk assessment. It may be that some of the person accessing internet may have bad intentions, and then it will be useful 6 months or 1 week, 1 year later to access their history on the net. It's done by public and private actors, and it's creating digital traces, what it has been called a digital double of yourself, which allows a traceability of every individual. And I think that between the new carceral and the new surveillance, we can see some common approaches of monitoring. Along the trajectory, we can say that there are major steps like a risk assessment and a risk management way of thinking about the prison, the carceral, I should say, an iterative determination of the purpose and the scope of the monitoring, iterative determination, I think here about the constant adaptation of the execution of the initial sentence, for instance, and a definition of the data survey, which means that when you decide to collect data, you also have to say when you will go and ask for this data. Because it's, okay, you are under electronic monitoring with a GPS system. You are not followed 24 hours a day by someone. You must determine a moment when someone will access the data and say, oh, where was he yesterday evening? Was he home, at his work, or in the neighborhood of the victim? The predefinition by the judgment is put in question also by the sentence execution court. There are also refusal to define the sense of imprisonment. For instance, in the preparatory documents of the penitentiary law in Belgium, they refused to define the sense of the imprisonment. They said the sense of the penalty is the responsibility of the convict, because it's his punishment, not ours. So he has to manage for a sense, he has to give a sense to this. All these are occasion for this iterative functioning. My interrogation about this is, what about the time? How can we imagine, or how can we ça c'est trop difficile pour moi. How can we imagine a theory of the new prison time? There are two logics. The carceral used to be a recursive projective process, strict application of a pre-existent decision. This decision addressed a past problem, the offense, and the decision aimed at disciplining for the future. So the judge looked in the past and then decided for the future. But I think that now a new logic emerged that aims at altering trajectories of people, not just condemning them, not just saying you will now stay in a prison for 10 years, but altering the individual trajectories, which implies a long-term monitoring and a new temporality. This is a question of anticipation and recursion. I propose here a small scheme of risk assessment as first step, then implementation of a monitoring, then an alert, analysis of the data collected, and then a second decision, a new monitoring, for instance, a judgment by a penal court. The monitoring of the convict is the decision of a new punishment. Then there is a system of alerts or of terms. It can be that every 6 months, every month, after 3 years or so. Then an analysis by a monitoring instance, for instance, to determine if the person can be put under electronic monitoring and then freed from prison. And then next, sentence execution court, monitoring of convict, positive alert, liberation. What happens then? Social Security Administration. The person is liberated, but there is a huge probability that he will ask for help of the welfare state. And then he comes under the same system, but ruled not by the penitentiary administration, but then by the Social Security Administration. And I stopped after 4 steps, but I could go, in this way I could go on for, yeah, I only have 15 minutes, I think. So I stopped. This new vision of this new temporality implies a vision of time as a continuity. Classically, repressive processes are discrete. They are, I refer here to the limit form. I won't explain, but some people here know what I'm talking about. But they are discrete, which means that they are based on a system of clear temporal articulation, stasis and ruptures. You are at the police, then you are transferred to the public prosecutor. The file is managed by the public prosecutor, and one day you are before the court, and then you are judged, and then there is the execution of the sentence, and so on and so on. It means that you always know in which room, so to speak, you are in. There are clear articulations between instances, institutions, but also phases of the procedure. The new logic is continuous. At every moment, it is the continuation of the previous one and the preparation of the next. If you have to alter a trajectory, you must always know what happened before and always predict or wish what should happen thereafter. The time is an ever-flowing time, and in this model, you have to cooperate with other institutions. So you cannot just say, oh, I'm the public prosecutor, I don't have to know what the other actors are doing. I don't have to collaborate with them. If I have to manage the file on a long-term basis to alter the trajectory, I have to collaborate with them. And then I have to see time as a continuity and not as it's now my time and then thereafter I don't care. Après moi les mouches, comme on dit en français. The discrete nature of time in classical carcerality results in rhythms, repetitions, and alternations of stasis and rupture. For instance, the ever-repeating day of the prisoner. Nowadays, there is a blurring of this rhythm. First, a desynchronization of individuals. In the past, you could say that every prisoner experienced every day in the same way. But if ever the detention plan comes into application in Belgium, it will change the whole days because they will have different activities, they will have the right to ask for different activities, and then the carceral administration will be confronted with a desynchronization of the inmates. But there are also variations through the times, because at the beginning of the imprisonment and at the end, the rhythm won't be the same. So the time that is the evolution of the time is also an evolution of the rhythm of the time. There is also a question of extension. Classical carceral temporality used to amplify the ruptures between the phases, even if we know it, the institution communicated. The temporality of monitoring is blurring the temporal articulations. For instance, inside the carceral, the liberation is an evolution of the control rather than a rupture. When you are freed today, it's almost never a total freedom. It's okay, you are under electronic monitoring. You are more free, yes, but the control remains constant and it will evolve. But also between the carceral and the normal life, the rupture is even harder to distinguish because convicts and welfare recipients are very similarly monitored. The injunctions that are given to them are very similar. In my working paper, I have more examples about Belgian practices about this, and my paper is public, so I will give it to anybody. Normalization was one of the goals of the Belgian law, and we can say that the objective of normalization is partially achieved because there are two choices. Or the logic of the free society entered the carceral with this blurring of the time, or the logic of the carceral spread across the society. But the question may be, does it make sense today to try to distinguish these different phases and these different phases. Is the distinction between carceral and non-carceral legitimate today? If the people are managed the same way on both sides, which sense does it have to think about the carceral? In conclusion, social sciences challenge the border of the psychiatric hospital, the prison, the school, addressing the question of the legitimacy of the closure. Nowadays, as the limits are blurred by the system itself, the challenge may be to distinguish these institutions one from another, besides going on with revealing the circuitry. And maybe, to summarize it, maybe we are going from a first question to a second one. The first was how to justify this separate world. And maybe the second question could be how can we identify this world and go on addressing the question of its legitimacy. Because if we are not able to identify it, we won't be able to address its legitimacy. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Are there any specific questions for Christophe before we proceed? Nancy.
I found that very interesting, and I was